I remember the afternoon sunlight streaming through the living room curtains on the day my mother broached the subject of marriage proposals for my two older sisters. The gentle amber glow of the late day seemed almost to promise new beginnings. My mother, whom I simply addressed as mother or mom, sat at the dining table alongside my father, her voice hushed, yet insistent, as she explained the proposal that had come. The air was thick with a familiar tension, the kind that set my heart fluttering each time the topic of marriage came up in our home. Shabana's father, Mom began, addressing him by referencing me, her youngest child. That was her modest, respectful habit, to call him Shabana's father, rather than using his first name. I need to share something with you. There's an excellent proposal for our two eldest daughters. The young man is educated, gainfully employed, and even owns his own home in the city. His business is thriving. We rarely receive proposals like this. From my spot near the window, I could see how my father's hand froze in mid-motion, spoon hovering over his plate. He slowly turned his gaze to my mother, a frown overshadowing what had moments before been a neutral expression. Even in the subtle shift of his eyes, I sensed anger igniting, as though hearing about a new proposal triggered an ancient wound. They want both of our older daughters, Mom continued, trying to maintain her calm. I caught my breath. My oldest sister was 30, the second one 28, and both had been longing for a chance to begin their own families. Seeing a genuine proposal that welcomed both of them felt like a stroke of blessing, yet in our home, blessings had a way of morphing into conflicts. They specifically asked for both girls, Mom repeated, one for their son and one for their nephew. It seems like such a good match. I snuck a glance at my two older sisters who sat quietly in another corner of our modest living area. My second sister discreetly clasped her trembling hands together. The eldest kept her gaze fixed on a random point on the wall, though her posture, tense shoulders, rigid spine, revealed her anxiety. They both had reason to hope, but they also knew our father had never been one to embrace marriage proposals easily. My father, sometimes we simply called him Dad, set down his spoon. His face darkened, his lips pressing together into a firm line. An ominous silence hung between him and my mother. "Didn't I tell you before," he finally said, his voice grating, "that I'm not ready to marry off our daughters yet? How many times must I repeat myself?" His sudden explosion of frustration disturbed me. Mom, sensing his anger, rested her head in her hands, bracing herself. "What do you want then?" she asked. "Our oldest is 30. The second one is 28. The younger two are also approaching adulthood. You know, good proposals don't come every day. Why would you refuse such a wonderful match?" Her tone carried a plea. "If we wait any longer, it may be too late for the older two. Marriage might become an even greater challenge." My father's nostrils flared. I could practically feel the pulse of his anger from across the room. In a voice steeled with indignation, he snapped, "You are an ignorant woman. Do you understand? I work from morning until night, sweating like a beast of burden to earn a living. Then I come home hoping for peace, one meal in silence. But you refuse to give me even that." He pushed back from the table, glaring. "You nag and nag, ignoring how tired I am. Why can't I just have a single meal without hearing about marriage proposals and demands to marry off my daughters? Ever since you became part of my life, I've known no real peace." My mother swallowed hard. I could see her blinking away tears, though she kept her head lowered. My oldest sisters lowered their eyes, too, as if trying to become invisible. My father, face livid, rose from his seat and stalked out of the house, leaving dinner unfinished on the table. A hollow quiet filled the space in his wake. My mother turned to me with eyes brimming with tears. I hurried over and squeezed her hand gently, sitting beside her. "Mom," I whispered, "why does Dad act this way? Why is he so against our sisters' marriages? Can't we figure out what's going on in his heart?" She let out a trembling sigh. "I wish I knew. Sometimes I wonder if something weighs on him that I can't see. He's been like this for so long, fighting every suggestion of marriage for our girls, refusing to even consider letting them go. Do you know how worried I am for your older sisters? If they don't marry soon, they might struggle to find a good match later." Her voice cracked, tears finally escaping. What will happen if, God forbid, we grow old or sick? Who will care for them then? Why doesn't he understand how precarious their future is? Though I wanted to comfort her, I felt helpless. My father's reasons were an enigma even to me. My older sisters, perched nearby, had tear-streaked faces. One whispered, "He wants us to grow old in this house, locked away until no one will marry us. Maybe he believes nobody is good enough for us, but we'll be the ones to suffer." I tried to muster hope in my voice. "Maybe he's dreaming of millionaires and luxurious families for you. Maybe he'll change his mind once he realizes how good this proposal is." The second sister gave me a wan smile of thanks, though her eyes were dull with resignation. Late that night, Father still hadn't returned home. I paced my small room, pressing my ear to the door now and then, listening for the click of the front gate. My sisters shared a different bedroom, partly because my late-night studying disturbed their sleep. In those days, I was the only one still in college, grappling with textbooks late into the evening. But that particular night, my mind was too unsettled to focus on academic notes. At last, around midnight, I heard the sound of the front door creaking open. I listened as Father shuffled through the hallway toward the room he shared with my mother, then heard the quiet murmur of their voices before they shut the door. Soon, the house was silent again. With the immediate tension past, I slipped into my own room, locked the door, and pulled out the small cell phone hidden at the bottom of my battered backpack. My heart beat fast. This phone was a secret, a gift from the boy I cared about, Ramiz. He had insisted I needed it for private conversations, away from my father's watchful eye. I dialed Ramiz's number, anticipation and anxiety coiling in my chest. He answered on the second ring, his voice tender and relieved. "All day your phone was off," he murmured. "I've been going crazy without your voice. Do you even realize how much I miss you?" Something about his affectionate tone made my worries lift for a moment, like a small flame of comfort in the darkness. I offered him a weary smile he couldn't see. "I'm sorry," I said. "There was no chance to turn it on earlier. We had guests come from my older sisters." Then quietly, I recounted the day's ordeal. My mother's attempts to sway my father, his refusal, his anger, the heartbreak etched on my sisters' faces. Ramiz let out a low whistle. "Why won't he let them marry? That's so unfair to your sisters. Doesn't he realize time is passing and good proposals don't wait forever?" I breathed heavily. "He's always like this. I don't know if it's fear or if he's just convinced no one is worthy of us. But he acts like he'd rather see my sisters stay single than risk them getting hurt or something." My voice quivered with frustration. We spoke a little longer, gentle reassurances from him, me listening, letting my stress dissolve a bit through the connection of our whispered confidences. Then I hung up. It was risky to talk too long at such an hour. I fell into bed, my emotions seesawing between worry for my sisters and the comforting knowledge that Ramiz cared about me. The next morning, when I arrived at the college gates, I spotted Ramiz across the street. My heart jumped at seeing his familiar figure leaning casually against a wall. The moment he noticed me, my phone buzzed. I picked it up and heard him say, "Hey, let's skip classes today. I want to spend time with you, talk about some things in person." Fear immediately pricked my skin. "I can't," I said in a hushed tone. "Someone might see us. If word got back to my father?" My voice trailed off in dread. Imagining my father's reaction made me break into a cold sweat. Without giving Ramiz further explanation, I hurriedly ended the call. Nervous energy propelled me through the college gate. I couldn't risk being spotted talking to him on the street. The memory of my father's thunderous anger was fresh in my mind. I didn't realize how deeply my refusal would wound Ramiz. Late that afternoon, I tried calling him to explain, but his phone was switched off. 1 day passed, 2 days passed. He never appeared near the college again. His phone remained unreachable. My worry mounted to near desperation. Where had he gone? Why wouldn't he speak to me? Finally, on the third day, his phone was active again. Heart pounding, I called. When he answered, the anger in his voice startled me. "You cast me aside that day," he said tersely. "I asked you so politely, but you treated me like I was a criminal. Do you think I'd hurt you, kidnap you? All I wanted was a bit of your time. Why did you run?" My throat constricted with shame and regret. "It's not what you think," I tried to say, but He clicked off before I could finish. Over the next week, I bombarded him with messages, calls, apologies. Eventually, he softened enough to speak to me. Our conversation took on a new dimension of seriousness. "I can't live without you," he confessed one day, his tone laced with raw emotion. "But my parents are pushing me to get married, and you say not to bring them to your house because your father will refuse. So what am I supposed to do? Wait forever?" I closed my eyes, a knot of fear tightening in my chest. "I'm just worried about my father's reaction," I whispered. "He didn't even allow my older sisters to marry. How would he react if your family came to propose for me before my older sisters are married? He'd lose his mind." Ramiz let out a frustrated sigh. Then he calmly said something that shook me to the core. "Let's just run away and get married on our own. We'll do it in secret. Afterward, your parents will have no choice but to accept. Parents never stay angry forever." An icy ripple of terror ran down my spine. "No," I managed in a trembling voice. "I can't do that. My father, he'd disown me, or worse. This is too big a step." But Ramiz was insistent. "Why not?" he argued. "Don't we have a right to be happy? Isn't it worse to be prisoners in our own home? If your father wants to keep you under lock and key, that doesn't mean you have to waste your entire life." We circled the topic, me oscillating between love for him and fear of the drastic consequences if we eloped. Eventually, my final exams loomed, and I begged him to drop the subject until they finished. I couldn't juggle both my frantic study schedule and the immense stress of planning to run away. Reluctantly, he agreed. Yet as my exams approached their end, a bizarre twist shook our household. My father, who had refused to let my sisters marry for so many years, suddenly announced in our living room, "I've decided to arrange a wedding ceremony for all 4 of my daughters." Instantly, alarm bells rang in my mind. All 4 of us? My mother gaped in shock. So did my older sisters, and especially my youngest sister, who was barely in 8th grade. The fear in her eyes made my stomach twist. "You mean for the older 2, right?" my mother ventured hopefully. "We have a perfect proposal for them right now, remember? Why not let them marry those suitors?" My father shook his head, ignoring her plea. "I told you to tell them no. I don't want your older daughters marrying them. I've decided all 4 of my girls will remain in this house. I'm arranging a ceremony tomorrow, marrying them to the holy book. After that, they won't leave home." A deep chill settled over me. In some cultural circles, there is a horrific tradition of symbolically marrying a daughter to a religious text to prevent her from ever marrying a real husband. It's not sanctioned by religion, of course, but some families misuse it to retain property or protect the girls from perceived external threats. In practice, it dooms daughters to a life of loneliness at home. My mother's face drained of color. "You can't do that," she murmured. "Our daughters have lives to live. The 2 oldest are grown women. The younger ones are still children. Please, for heaven's sake, be sensible. Let the older 2 accept the proposals from that respectable family." But my father refused to listen. "I've made my choice. There's nothing more to say." He left the room, returning not long after with 4 sets of white cloth, instructing my mother to have them sewn into matching dresses by the next day. "From now on," he declared, "none of you step outside." My sisters and I exchanged stunned looks. A wave of hopelessness seemed to crush our hearts. My older sisters, who had pinned their last hope on the family that had come with a proposal, looked numb with disbelief. My youngest sister's lips quivered, tears threatening to fall. That same evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I found my father quietly finishing his dinner. My mother was too distraught to cook, so he had brought takeout. He ate in silence, as though at peace with a monumental decision. It was a chilling sight. Something inside me snapped. If my father truly went through with that ceremony, none of us would ever marry or have children. We would be locked in the house forever, losing every dream of a future family. My older sister's heartbreak flashed before my eyes. My youngest sister's fleeting childhood cut short by a lifetime of forced isolation. And me, never allowed to see Ramiz again. That night, I dug out my phone with trembling hands and called Ramiz. "I'll do it," I said, voice shaking. I'll run away with you. I can't stay here anymore. He let out a sharp breath, almost a laugh of triumph. Yes, I knew you'd realize it was the only way. Don't worry, I'll have everything ready, trust me. Hanging up, I clasped my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Fear and anticipation roiled inside my stomach. Part of me felt like I was betraying my family, but another part told me it was my only escape. Marriage to a book, a fate worse than anything I could imagine. Around 2 a.m, while my father and sisters slept, my phone lit up. A single text from Ramiz. I'm waiting outside your house. I tiptoed across the hallway, a small duffel bag clutched in one hand. The house was dimly lit by a single hallway bulb. My sister's doors were shut. No sound emerged from my parents' room. I paused, looking around at the shadows of the home I had known all my life. The battered furniture, the family photos on the wall, a crocheted blanket my mother had made. Every piece whispered memories, good and bad. My breath hitched, but I forced myself forward. My father would never let me or my sisters lead normal lives. Better to run than be locked away forever, I thought, forcing courage into my trembling limbs. I reached the front door, carefully lifted the latch, and began to push it open. Suddenly, light flooded the courtyard. I froze in horror. Standing at the switch was my father, his eyes going wide as he took in the scene, me, in my nightclothes, with a duffel bag halfway out the front door. For a moment, time stood still. We locked eyes, neither able to speak. Then my father let out a strangled gasp, reaching for his chest. I saw the color drain from his face as he seemed to crumple onto the floor. Shocked, I dropped my bag and lunged to support him, but he sank to his knees, one hand clutching the front of his shirt, the other groping for something to steady himself. "Dad!" I screamed, my voice echoing off the courtyard's cement walls. I scrambled to wake my mother, shouting for help. My younger sister stumbled out of her room, terrified, while my older sisters followed, all of us frantic. My father lay on the ground, barely conscious, beads of sweat dotting his forehead. Everything happened in a blur. We managed to get him into the car with the help of a neighbor and my uncle, whom I called in desperation. At the hospital, a doctor examined him and announced it was a heart attack. Had we arrived any later, we might have lost him. I stood in the corridor, heart pounding, as they wheeled my father into a ward. My phone vibrated incessantly, no doubt Ramiz wondering where I was. But I ignored it, turning it off entirely. My father's life now hung in the balance, and the thought of running away seemed horrifying in that moment. For 2 days, my father lay in a hospital bed, sedated and grimly silent. I was riddled with guilt. My mother, sisters, and I took turns holding vigil at his bedside. Finally, he stabilized enough to speak, though his voice was weak. His gaze seemed vacant, as though a critical piece of his spirit had vanished. Back at home, the atmosphere was cautiously subdued. My mother fussed over him, ensuring he had the right medications and plenty of rest. My sisters and I moved quietly around the house, worried he might get angry or lash out at me for my near betrayal, but he spoke very little. It was as if the heart attack had drained all the fight out of him. On the 3rd day, to everyone's astonishment, my father turned to my mother and said in a soft, measured tone, "Call that family, Farouk's parents, who had come with the proposal for our older daughters. Tell them I agree to the match, if they're still willing." I recall how the rest of us stared, utterly incredulous. My mother spilled the tea she was carrying in shock. My older sisters, who had begun to believe they might never leave the house, exchanged tearful looks. Relief and cautious hope warred within them. Even my youngest sister, though not directly affected, let out a sigh as if a massive weight had lifted. For a moment, I stood in the background, my heart pounding with gratitude, confusion, and fear. I had dreaded that he would tell everyone how he found me at the door, escaping with a bag. Yet he didn't say a word about it. Instead, he had made a stunning turnaround, consenting to a union he had once ferociously opposed. In the days that followed, the household erupted in a flurry of wedding preparations. My 2 older sisters were ecstatic, albeit disbelieving. Colors and fabrics were discussed at length. My mother arranged for bridal outfits, scheduling visits to the tailor with a newfound energy that I hadn't seen in her for ages. Even so, I kept my distance from my father, unsure if he harbored unspoken anger toward me. Eventually, one afternoon, when my mother was out shopping and my older sisters were immersed in choosing wedding decorations, I found my father alone in his bedroom. He was propped up on a simple wooden bed, legs stretched out, reading a newspaper he didn't seem particularly focused on. Summoning courage, I stepped in quietly. He glanced up, surprise flickering across his features before his expression softened. I carefully knelt beside him, tears gathering in my eyes. "Dad," I said gently, "please forgive me. I'm so sorry about that night. I never meant to hurt you." For a heartbeat, he was silent. Then, with a shaky breath, he reached out and grasped my hands. "What you did broke me," he said at last, his voice husky. "When I saw you at the door, ready to leave, I realized how close I was to losing everything. I never imagined one of my daughters would feel so desperate to flee." Tears slipped down my cheeks. "I was afraid," I whispered. "Afraid you'd keep us all locked away. You insisted you didn't want us marrying, but you never told us why." He nodded, blinking rapidly as though to clear away painful memories. "Do you know I had 3 brothers?" he began unprompted. "We also had a baby sister, the youngest, the darling of our family. She was 16, radiant like a newly bloomed flower. Suitors came early for her because she was so beautiful. My parents decided to marry her off, convinced it was the right time." He let out a long sigh, eyes far away. I disagreed, but they wouldn't listen. Soon my sister was married. At first she visited often, but she always seemed sad. Her soft cheeks lost their color. She cried easily, always hinting at maltreatment from her in-laws, though she never said much to my parents, who believed a daughter's place was with her husband's family. His voice caught in his throat. Then one night, there was an explosion in her home. A gas cylinder. She was badly burned and died before we could see her again. I suspect foul play to this day, but we had no proof. With no evidence, we were helpless to do anything. My sister was gone. My parents buried their heads in regret. I sniffled, understanding dawning. He continued, "From that moment, I swore to protect my own daughters from heartbreak. I became consumed with terror that you'd end up with a cruel husband, just like my sister. It was an irrational fear, maybe, but it haunted me. The only way I believed I could keep you safe was by never letting you go at all." His words trembled with emotion. It was foolish, I see that now, but I was blinded by my own grief. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched his hand. "Dad, I'm so sorry you had to go through that," I murmured, my voice shaky. "But not everyone is cruel. You can't just lock us away. It breaks us more than you realize." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his shoulders sagged. "I know now," he said quietly, "especially after your attempt to run away. I realized I was pushing you to do desperate things. The heart attack forced me to confront the fact that if I didn't let you live your lives, you'd find a way to leave. Maybe in secret or by some other route. I nearly lost you entirely." Wrapping my arms around him, I sobbed, and he held me close, tears slipping onto my hair. It was a powerful, poignant moment, a kind of release from years of tension. That conversation shifted everything between us. Soon after, preparations for my older sister's wedding ramped up in earnest. The suitors, Farouk and his cousin, both turned out to be good people. Their families were respectful. The entire house was transformed by the hustle of wedding arrangements, measuring for new clothes, finalizing the guest list, deciding on the menu for the wedding feast, and so on. Father contributed financially, but I noticed he stayed mostly in the background, subdued. It seemed he was still grappling with guilt and fear, but at least he was no longer forbidding the marriage. Meanwhile, Ramiz remained in the wings of my life, texting and calling. One day, I told him, "My father has finally agreed to let my older sisters marry. Perhaps he'll let me marry too." Ramiz was quick to act, bringing his parents to our house with a formal proposal. My father, to my immense relief, did not resist. He eyed them with caution but agreed to talk. My mother, though nervous, welcomed them warmly, and eventually we became officially engaged. When my older sister's wedding day arrived, the house was awash in color and music. Elegant dresses in bright hues spilled across every surface. Wedding songs hummed from the old CD player, mixing with the chatter of visiting relatives. My sisters, radiant in their bridal attire, tried to contain both nerves and excitement. I helped them with their veils, pinned flowers in their hair, all while feeling a bittersweet swirl inside me. Happy they were free, yet longing to see how my own life would unfold. Father lingered at the edges of the festivities. Sometimes I caught a flicker of sadness in his eyes, as if he was remembering his lost sister or grieving the years wasted refusing good proposals. But when he came to my sisters, draped a shawl over their heads, and blessed them with a trembling hand, I saw love in his expression, tempered by remorse. Once my sisters departed in a flurry of tears and wedding cars, the house felt emptier, yet a sense of relief was palpable. Father and mother no longer worried about my sisters languishing at home. Soon after, my father turned to me and quietly said, "If Ramiz's parents want to move forward, I won't stop them." I was stunned by the swiftness of it, but also deeply grateful. Ramiz's parents set a date, and we began planning my wedding. I went through the motions in a surreal haze, arranging my bridal outfit, selecting jewelry, inviting friends. At times, I'd close my eyes and remember the night I almost left home forever. Things could have been so different. On my own wedding day, I wore a flowing red dress embroidered with gold thread. My mother wept discreetly, hugging me before the ceremony, whispering blessings into my ear, and father, though reticent, gently held my hand and said, "Be happy. I pray that your husband treats you like a queen. Forgive me for the mistakes I made out of fear." Tears shimmered in my eyes. "I'm just grateful we have this moment," I whispered back. The ceremony itself passed in a blur, the swirl of guests, the formal signing of documents, the hush of prayers. Soon, I found myself sitting before Ramiz in a small side room, the two of us alone for a moment amid the celebrations. He looked at me with an uncharacteristic seriousness. "Remember the day we almost ran away?" he said softly, reaching to take my hand. "It feels like a lifetime ago now, but sometimes I think about what we almost did. It would have broken your father, and maybe my parents too. We were so desperate that we couldn't see the bigger picture." I pressed my fingertips to my veil, my eyes burning with emotion. "We were both terrified," I admitted. "At the time, it felt like the only way. But in the end, that terrible night showed my father the truth. And here we are, married properly with our family's blessings." Ramiz nodded, relief shining in his eyes. "Yes, it worked out by the grace of God. I know parents don't stay angry at their children forever, but I'm glad we didn't push them to that extreme. Seeing your father collapse like that, I wouldn't wish such a scare on anyone." Gently, he brushed a tear from my cheek. The wedding festivities resumed outside, but in that quiet moment, it felt like the future had opened up with more hope than I had ever dared to imagine. Life settled into a new rhythm in the months following my wedding. My father's health improved, though he never quite regained the robust energy he once had. Perhaps the heart attack aged him in more ways than one. He walked more slowly and tired easily, but he also treated people with greater gentleness. My older sisters, both living with their husbands' families in different parts of the city, dropped by often. Each visit lit my mother's face with joy, and I often noticed father struggling to smile warmly, as if he was still learning how to express support without that old layer of fear. My youngest sister continued school uninterrupted, free of any further threats of forced isolation. In fact, father encouraged her to study diligently, sometimes even giving her pocket money to buy books. It was a quiet, remarkable transformation. When I came to visit one weekend, I found him sitting in the courtyard, watering the withered plants that lined the walls. The sun was bright overhead. My father seemed lost in thought. As soon as he noticed me, he set down the watering can. He greeted me softly, almost shyly, like someone who still carried guilt for the pain he had once caused. "How have you been?" he asked, eyes flicking to the thin gold bangles on my wrist, gifts from Ramiz's mother. I told him I was well and that Ramiz treated me kindly. A flicker of relief passed over his face. "I'm glad," he said simply. "I pray you stay that way." There was a time when I would have given anything for such simple acceptance. Now it was mine, albeit hard-won. That day I followed him inside, where my mother was bustling around, planning a small family gathering. My father had actually suggested it, a meal to celebrate the presence of all his daughters in happy marriages. We gathered around the table that evening, my two older sisters and their husbands, me and Ramiz, my younger sister, my parents, and a few close relatives. Laughter rippled across the table, peppered with good-natured teasing. I occasionally caught my father gazing at everyone with a pensive expression, as if cataloging the differences from just a few short months ago. Once, I found him alone in the kitchen, staring at a pot of tea on the stove. "Everything all right?" I asked gently. He turned, startled, then nodded. "I was just thinking how peaceful this is," he said. "No more fights about marriage. No more tension in the house." His shoulders rose in a long, deliberate breath. "Your mother was always right, you know," he added, voice cracking slightly. "I was the fool who couldn't see that letting you all go would lead to this. Everyone sitting happily together." I softly touched his arm. "It's never too late," I said. "We're all here now." He managed a faint smile and ruffled my hair like he used to do when I was a child. In that tiny gesture, I felt the weight of all the unspoken apologies he still carried. Occasionally, in quiet moments at home with Ramiz, I'd recall the chaos of that earlier time. My father's ironclad prohibitions, my mother's tearful pleas, my sister's drifting hopes. Ramiz confessed he too had nightmares about that night, imagining me stepping out into the darkness and how differently things might have unfolded if my father hadn't caught me. Sometimes the most devastating moments also lead to the most meaningful changes. We never tried to whitewash the fact that running away had been a genuine possibility. In another reality, I might have done it, leaving my family to reel from my betrayal. The guilt would have haunted me, and father might never have recovered from the shock. Or perhaps we would have lived under a permanent rift. But fate intervened in a dramatic if dangerous way, and it forced each of us to confront the truth. That love can only endure if it's allowed to grow freely, not locked away by fear. My older sisters thrived in their new roles as wives and eventually mothers. Within a couple of years, I became an aunt. The first time one of my sisters arrived cradling a tiny newborn, father's eyes brimmed with tears as he held his grandchild for the first time. I saw in that moment the redemption he craved. This child, alive and loved, was proof that the next generation wouldn't repeat old tragedies. Meanwhile, my youngest sister soared in her studies. She showed a talent for science and announced she wanted to become a doctor. Instead of shutting her down, father quietly supported her, saving money for her future college tuition. If I had any lingering doubts about his transformation, they melted when I saw him encouraging her to chase her dreams. One of the most touching changes in our family was how we began celebrating occasions. We'd always marked religious holidays and birthdays, but now we started a tradition of gathering every few months for a family meal, what my mother jokingly called a thankfulness dinner. The first time we did it, father tentatively shared a few words of reflection on how lucky he felt to see his daughters leading happy lives. Mother, tears shining, said it was all she had ever wanted. We had small expansions to these gatherings each time. Maybe we'd invite neighbors or have each daughter bring a dish. Once I brought a dessert Ramiz had helped me make, and father seemed quietly proud that his once sheltered girl was now a capable wife running her own home. Over time, the memory of near disaster faded into the background, replaced by a calmer sense that we'd navigated a storm and reached safer shores. Every so often, I caught glimpses of sorrow in father's eyes, usually when discussing an upcoming wedding or hearing about a young bride. Maybe he remembered his own sister's tragic end, yet he never again tried to stand in the way of his daughter's happiness. Nor did he attempt to isolate my youngest sister from prospective matches when she came of age. Instead, he had learned the importance of trusting that life could be kind rather than cruel. Several years later, when I was settled into my married life, father asked if I would accompany him to visit an old graveyard in his ancestral town. It was where his parents and sister were buried. He had not gone there for many years, presumably out of guilt, grief, or both. I agreed, sensing he needed someone by his side. We made the trip on a hot afternoon, driving through dusty roads until we reached the quiet burial grounds. Father walked slowly, leaning on a cane. When we arrived at a modest headstone that bore his sister's name, he sank to his knees. For a long while, he was silent, tears slipping down his face. I stood a short distance away, giving him privacy. At length, he murmured, "I'm sorry, I was too young back then to protect you." I promised I would never let my daughters face the same fate, and I nearly lost them in my obsession. I hope you can forgive me. His voice resonated with decades of heartbreak. I swallowed hard, tears in my own eyes. In that moment, I felt the old threads of sorrow unraveling. It was as if his sister's silent presence bore witness to his confession. After we left the grave, Father seemed lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from his chest. Back in the car, he stared at the passing fields, softly murmuring, "No father should have to bury a daughter." Back home, life continued. My sisters and I were able to visit each other without constraints. Our mother blossomed, finally free from the incessant battles over marriage proposals. Father, while more subdued than he had been in earlier days, developed a gentle sense of humor and a readiness to apologize if he ever spoke sharply. It was a rare transformation and one that I cherished. As for Ramiz and me, we faced our share of normal married couple ups and downs, but we faced them knowing that we hadn't destroyed relationships to be together. Instead, we had found a path to acceptance. My father's near-fatal heart attack, horrible though it was, had ultimately saved us from making rash choices we might have regretted forever. Once, sitting on our couch at home, Ramiz rested his arm around my shoulders and said, "Remember that phone I gave you? The one you kept hidden in your bag?" I suppose in a twisted way, it was a blessing. We got to talk, stay connected, and it led to some important realizations. I nodded, thinking of all the late-night calls filled with longing and worry. It's strange to think that if it weren't for that phone, I might never have been bold enough to consider leaving. And if I hadn't considered leaving, Father might never have been forced to see how close he was to losing me. Ramiz's eyes were thoughtful. Life can be unpredictable. Sometimes it takes a crisis to jolt us into changing. Your father was so fixed in his mindset. Maybe witnessing you at the threshold was the only thing that could break that cycle. We fell into a reflective silence. Then I smiled, leaning my head against his shoulder. "I'm just thankful we ended up here," I said, "with everyone safe and our families intact." Gradually, my family's story became a cautionary tale we sometimes shared discreetly with people who found themselves in similarly restrictive circumstances. My mother, for instance, once counseled a neighbor whose sister's daughter was facing parental objections to a marriage. "Learn from our mistakes," she gently advised the parents. "Delay can destroy a girl's future. Excessive fear does more harm than good." I, too, occasionally spoke to younger college friends, especially those with controlling parents who refused to let them consider potential matches. "Try to communicate before it's too late," I'd urge. Sometimes parents are weighed down by their own traumatic experiences. If you show them patience and empathy, you might reach an understanding. Of course, every situation differs, but empathy and honest dialogue can open doors. One evening, perhaps a year after my wedding, my father organized a celebratory dinner at a local event hall, a belated wedding reception for both me and my older sisters. He had initially been too ill at the time of our ceremonies to plan anything elaborate, so now he wanted to gather extended relatives and neighbors for a combined celebration. We teased him that it was unusual to hold a party so long after the fact, but he just shrugged and said, "I want everyone to see how happy my daughters are." I will never forget the sight of him standing at the entrance to greet guests wearing a simple yet dignified suit, a proud if somewhat tentative smile on his lips. My mother stood by his side, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. When my sisters and I arrived, dressed in festive outfits, Father hugged us one by one, whispering blessings in our ears. Ramiz joined me, greeting my parents respectfully. The hall shimmered with lights, laughter, and warm conversation. Midway through the event, Father stood at a small podium he had set up. Clearing his throat, he addressed the crowd. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he said quietly. "Some of you know I had reservations about letting my daughters marry. I lost my sister when she was just a teenager. I carried the weight of that fear for decades, and I nearly destroyed my daughters' futures because of it. I'm sharing this with you today so that no other parent will make the same mistake. Sometimes we act out of love, but our actions can hurt those we love most." Silence draped the hall, punctuated only by a few sniffles. My older sisters exchanged emotional glances, tears in their eyes. I felt Ramiz squeeze my hand. Even my youngest sister looked on, eyes wide. My father drew a shuddering breath. Now, seeing my daughters happy, I wish I'd let go of my fears sooner. I pray no father has to learn this lesson the hard way. May God bless all of you and your children. It was one of the few times I saw him address a crowd with such naked vulnerability. A ripple of respect passed through the audience, and a few relatives offered words of comfort. My mother discreetly dabbed at her eyes, and I couldn't help stepping forward to hug my father. The applause that followed felt like a collective sigh of relief and acceptance, a ceremony of healing. In time, each of us built our own lives. My oldest sister, after some years of marriage, enrolled in adult education classes to pursue a degree she'd always dreamed of. My second sister discovered a passion for cooking and turned it into a small catering business from her home. I eventually finished my own higher studies, balancing them with married life. Our youngest sister soared through high school, then college, eventually earning a scholarship to attend medical school, a far cry from the fate that once threatened her. Father's health waxed and waned, but the intangible shift was permanent. He never again attempted to control our marital destinies. Instead, he took quiet pride in each of our endeavors. Sometimes we'd come home to find him in the living room, rummaging through a stack of old photographs, reminiscing about our childhoods. If he noticed me watching, he'd smile sheepishly and say, "I wasted so much time. I should have encouraged you all sooner. If only I could turn back the clock." But no one can truly turn back the clock. We can only cherish the present and the lessons the past has taught us. That's precisely what we did, learning, healing, and creating a new family dynamic where fear no longer dictated every choice. Looking back on that tumultuous chapter of my life, I sometimes feel astonished by how close we came to disaster. Had my father not collapsed that night, I might have run away with Ramiz, leaving a wake of heartbreak and an irreparable rift in the family. Or worse, my father might have formally and permanently bound me, along with my sisters, to a life of lonely confinement, married off to the pages of a book instead of a living, breathing partner. But the threads of fate wove a different story. My father's health crisis jolted him awake, forcing him to see that his devotion, twisted by fear, was suffocating us. My near act of desperation revealed how dangerously high the stakes were. In the aftermath, we found a fragile path toward honesty and reconciliation. That path was not without tears, apologies, and regrets, but it was the road that led us to freedom and legitimate, joyful marriages. Now, in calmer times, I can share this story not as a tragedy, but as a testimony of how families can change, how fear can be undone by love if we allow ourselves to face the hard truths we carry. My father's love was always there, but it was locked behind sorrow from the loss of his own sister, an experience that shaped his entire worldview. Only by confronting that sorrow could he open the door to a better future for his daughters. The memory of him clasping my hands and whispering, "Forgive me," remains a powerful one. It taught me that even the most stubborn hearts can grow, and that parenthood sometimes involves misguided attempts at control, fueled by traumatic events. But love, vulnerability, and the courage to let go can heal even deep generational wounds. To this day, whenever I visit my parents' home, I pause by the threshold where I once stood, duffel bag in hand, on the brink of leaving forever. That little spot in the courtyard is just a patch of cracked concrete, but to me, it is a sacred reminder of the night everything almost fell apart, and the night everything changed. In that moment, heartbreak and healing collided, and from the ashes of that fear, a new beginning emerged for my entire family. I step across it now with a smile, a sense of peace filling my heart. My father sits in the living room reading the newspaper while my mother organizes some small gathering. My older sisters might be stopping by soon, children in tow, and the house will fill with laughter. My youngest sister, blossoming into adulthood, is charting a path toward a remarkable career. And I, happily married to Ramiz, no longer hide a cell phone in my bag to communicate in secret. Yes, the journey was fraught with tension, anger, and tears. But ultimately, love prevailed over fear, and acceptance triumphed over regret. That is the real story of our family, and it all began with a fierce father who loved his daughters too much to let them go, until he finally understood that sometimes letting go is the greatest act of love there is.